There is a specific agonizing type of heartbreak that does not come from a failed romance or a cruel husband. It is the deep, quiet devastation that comes from your own blood. The realization that the sibling you grew up with, the person who shared your childhood secrets and your family name, views your lifelong sacrifice as nothing more than a convenient stepping stone for their own greed. Clara Montgomery learned this bitter lesson on a suffocatingly warm Thursday afternoon, sitting in the dark mahogany-paneled office of the family solicitor in the heart of London. Clara was 48 years old. She possessed a striking quiet elegance, her dark hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her hands permanently carrying the faint, beautiful scent of crushed rosemary, sweet almond and dried rose petals. For 15 years, Clara had been the unseen, entirely unappreciated backbone of the Montgomery Apothecary and Perfumery, the most prestigious fragrance house in the city. When their father, Arthur, had suffered a severe, debilitating stroke, it was Clara who gave up her youth, her social life and any prospect of marriage to stay by his bedside. It was Clara who memorized his complex, legendary formulas, working late into the night by candlelight, grinding herbs and distilling essential oils to keep the business thriving while he slept in the room upstairs. Her younger sister, Isabella, had taken an entirely different path. Isabella loathed the smell of the workshop and the quiet duty of the sickroom. She married a boastful, arrogant shipping merchant named Edward, moved into a lavish city estate, and only visited their dying father when she needed her generous monthly allowance replenished. Yet when Arthur Montgomery finally passed away, leaving a gaping, profound hole in Clara's heart, Isabella did not waste a single moment grieving. She and Edward arrived at the solicitor's office dressed in impeccably tailored, expensive mourning clothes, wearing expressions of thinly veiled, predatory anticipation. Clara sat in a stiff leather chair, her eyes red from days of quiet weeping, expecting the formal transition of the business she had run single-handedly for over a decade. Instead, the solicitor adjusted his spectacles and read a newly discovered codicil to the will. Edward had paid an exorbitant sum to a private city lawyer to quietly intercept Arthur in his final delirious days, guiding the confused old man's shaking hand to sign a completely revised document. The solicitor's dry voice echoed in the silent room. The grand London townhouse, the massive fortune in the bank, and the absolute ownership of the Montgomery Perfumery brand were left entirely to Isabella and Edward. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. 15 years of exhausting, unyielding devotion, completely erased by a single signature obtained through manipulation and deceit. And for my eldest daughter Clara, the solicitor continued, avoiding her devastated gaze, I leave the deed to the Stone Creek property in the Southern Valleys, trusting she will find the open air beneficial to her health. Isabella let out a sharp, aristocratic scoff, adjusting her expensive silk gloves. Stone Creek? That miserable piece of dirt? It is a barren, rocky wasteland that hasn't grown a single blade of grass in 30 years. Father only kept it because the deed was too worthless to sell. Clara stood up slowly. Her muscles ached and her heart felt as though it had been violently crushed, but she refused to let her sister see her break. She looked at Isabella, searching the younger woman's perfectly powdered face for even a fraction of guilt or sisterly love. There was nothing. Isabella looked at her with the cold, victorious arrogance of a thief who had legally stolen an entire kingdom. You did not just steal his money, Isabella, Clara said, her voice dropping to a low, incredibly steady whisper that made Edward shift uncomfortably in his chair. You stole the legacy of a man who loved you, and you stole the only life I have ever known. You know nothing of the art of perfumery. You will ruin his name. I know the art of making money, Clara, Isabella sneered, standing up to meet her sister's gaze. The business requires modernization, not an old spinster grinding dried weeds in a dark basement. You have until tomorrow morning to vacate the premises. Take your old clothes and leave. The Montgomery brand belongs to me now. If you have ever been stabbed in the back by a family member you sacrificed everything for, please leave a like on this video. Let us show Clara that she is not alone, and that true talent can never be stolen by a piece of paper. Clara did not argue. She possessed a formidable, quiet dignity that could not be bought or intimidated. She walked back to the apothecary, completely ignoring the whispering staff who had already heard the news. She packed a single modest leather trunk with her simplest clothes. But before she left, she bypassed the grand safe containing the money. Instead, she opened a loose floorboard in the workshop and extracted her father's oldest, most guarded leather journal, along with a heavy canvas sack filled with rare dormant seeds he had acquired decades ago. She walked out into the cold London rain, carrying her own trunk, leaving the glass bottles and the wealth behind. Isabella thought she had stolen the empire. She didn't know that she had merely stolen the storefront, and that Clara was walking away with the absolute magic hidden in her own hands. The journey to the southern valleys was a grueling, bone-rattling transition from the cold, grey smog of London to a blazing, unforgiving frontier. Clara traveled for 3 days, first by a crowded, soot-stained train, and then by a mail coach that violently jolted over deeply rutted, unpaved country roads. As the coach ventured further south, the lush, green rolling hills slowly gave way to an arid, wildly untamed landscape. The air grew progressively hotter, dry and heavy, smelling of baked earth and wild, sun-scorched brush. When the exhausted driver finally pulled the horses to a halt at a deserted, dusty crossroad in the late afternoon, he looked back at Clara with an expression of genuine, undisguised pity. "This is the boundary of Stone Creek, ma'am," he grunted, wiping the sweat from his brow as he tossed her heavy leather trunk into the dry dirt. "Ain't nothing out there but rocks, rattlesnakes, and a sun hot enough to boil the water right out of your skin. If you want to take the coach back to the city, I won't charge you for the return fare." "Thank you for your concern, but I have reached my destination," Clara replied, her voice perfectly polite but utterly unyielding. She paid him her last remaining silver coins, picked up the heavy leather handle of her trunk, and began the long, agonizing walk up the desolate path. The heat was an immense, physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Her dark woolen city dress, designed for the damp chill of London, felt like a suffocating cage. The ground beneath her boots was cracked and parched, littered with massive, jagged stones that seemed to mock any attempt at cultivation. As she crested a small, rocky hill, the full reality of her sister's cruel inheritance finally came into view. In the center of the vast, barren field stood a crumbling, single-story stone cottage. The roof was partially caved in, the wooden shutters were bleached white by decades of relentless sun, and the front door hung awkwardly off a single rusted iron hinge. There was no vibrant garden, no well-kept orchard, no sign that life had ever thrived in this desolate, forgotten corner of the world. It was a graveyard of dirt and stone. Isabella had intentionally sent her here to wither and fade away. Clara dropped her heavy trunk onto the dusty ground near the broken front step. The sheer, overwhelming cruelty of her family's betrayal threatened to break her completely. She was 48 years old, standing utterly alone in a hostile, blazing wasteland, miles away from any comforting civilization. Her hands, which had spent the last 15 years delicately blending expensive, imported floral oils for the wealthiest women in England, were now covered in sweat and dry, red dust. A bitter, involuntary tear escaped her eye, leaving a clean track down her dirty cheek. But Clara Montgomery was not a woman who surrendered to the dark. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, worn leather journal she had rescued from the apothecary floorboards. She traced her fingers over the cover, feeling the echo of her father's steady presence. She opened the heavy wooden door of the ruined cottage, stepped into the dark, stifling interior, and immediately set to work. The first 3 days at Stone Creek were a brutal, agonizing trial of pure physical endurance. Clara woke before the sun breached the horizon, attacking the ruined property with a fierce, relentless determination. She cleared the dead brush, hauled away the debris from the collapsed roof, and used a rusted iron bucket to draw freezing, deep water from an ancient, partially blocked well she found behind the house. Her hands blistered violently, her muscles screamed in protest, and her pale skin burned under the unforgiving southern sun. On the 4th morning, Clara stood in the center of the massive rocky field that stretched out before the cottage. She had a heavy rusted iron hoe in her hands, attempting to break the hard, sun-baked crust of the earth to prepare a small plot for the seeds she had brought. But the ground was like solid iron. After an hour of agonizing, back-breaking labor, the wooden handle of the hoe caught on a massive, buried stone. The violent impact sent a shockwave of terrible pain up her arms, and the brittle ancient wood of the handle snapped completely in half, sending Clara stumbling backward into the dirt. She sat in the dust, gasping for breath, looking at the broken tool in her bleeding, blistered hands. The profound isolation and the sheer scale of the impossibility before her finally hit a breaking point. You are trying to fight the earth with a broken stick, madam. The earth is always going to win that battle. The voice was incredibly deep, rough, and entirely unexpected, rolling across the silent, hot field like low thunder. Clara scrambled to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat, shielding her eyes against the glaring sun. Standing a few yards away, leaning casually against a massive dead oak tree was a man. He was toweringly tall, incredibly broad-shouldered, and deeply tanned by years of hard labor under the southern sky. He wore a simple sweat-stained canvas shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with thick muscle and dotted with small, peculiar burn scars. His hair was thick, dark, and heavily threaded with silver, framing a rugged, handsome face that bore an expression of quiet, intense observation. If you are excited to see Clara turn this nightmare into a massive empire, and if you think this mysterious, rugged stranger is exactly the man she needs, leave a comment saying karma is coming. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. He did not look at her with the mocking arrogance of the city men. He looked at her broken tool, her dusty, sweat-stained dress, and the fierce, unbroken pride in her dark eyes. He slowly pushed himself off the oak tree, walked deliberately across the hot dirt and stopped right in front of her. He brought with him the sharp, distinct scent of wood smoke, hot sand, and something else, something that smelled surprisingly like melting glass. "I am Elias Reed," the giant man rumbled, his striking pale blue eyes locking onto hers with a devastating intensity. "I run the glass furnace on the upper ridge. I saw the coach drop you off 3 days ago. The villagers in town have a bet going that the city woman will pack her bags and flee before the week is out." Clara stood incredibly straight, ignoring her bleeding hands, calling upon every ounce of her formidable dignity. "Then I highly suggest you advise the villagers to save their money, Mr. Reed. Because I am not going anywhere." Elias looked at the broken iron hoe in the dirt, and then at Clara's bleeding, blistered hands. He didn't offer a patronizing smile or a gentle word of comfort. He understood intuitively that a woman who had just been discarded by her own flesh and blood did not want pity. She wanted results. He reached down with his massive, calloused hand, picking up the 2 splintered halves of the wooden handle as if they weighed absolutely nothing. "You are using a fragile garden tool designed for the soft, wet clay of the northern shires, Miss Montgomery," Elias said, his deep voice carrying a practical, unyielding authority. "This is southern rock. It will break your tools and then it will break your spine." Clara lifted her chin, refusing to let the profound exhaustion drag her down. "I am perfectly aware of the soil's composition, Mr. Reed. But since my sister ensured I arrived here with nothing but the clothes on my back and a single bag of seeds, I must use whatever I can find in that ruined shed. I have a crop to plant before the autumn rains arrive, and I will plant it even if I have to dig the holes with my bare, bleeding hands." Elias stared at her, his striking pale blue eyes narrowing slightly. He saw the absolute, terrifying determination radiating from her exhausted frame. For years, the villagers in the valley below had avoided the upper ridge, intimidated by the harshness of the land and Elias's solitary, intimidating presence. Yet here was a refined, elegant woman from London, standing ankle-deep in the scorching dust, ready to fight a mountain. "What exactly are you trying to plant in this wasteland?" Elias asked, stepping closer, his massive, broad-shouldered shadow offering a brief, unexpected respite from the glaring, punishing sun. "Corn will burn before it sprouts. Wheat will choke and die on the stones." "I am not a farmer, Mr. Reed," Clara replied, her voice steadying as she spoke of her true lifelong passion. "I am a master perfumer. I am planting Lavandula angustifolia, the true lavender. And the heavy, rocky, alkaline soil that everyone in this valley despises is exactly what that specific flower requires to produce the highest concentration of essential oils. The dry heat, the stones, the harsh drainage. It forces the roots deep, stressing the plant into producing a magnificent, potent fragrance that the wet, rich soil of the north could never replicate." Elias went completely still. A profound realization washed over his rugged, scarred features. He looked out over the massive, sprawling field of sun-baked rocks and dry dirt, and then back at the brilliant, formidable woman standing before him. The greedy people who had exiled her here thought they were handing her a painful death sentence. They had absolutely no idea they had just handed her a sleeping gold mine. If you absolutely love it when a villain's cruel plan completely backfires and accidentally hands the hero the keys to an empire, hit that like button right now. Isabella's karma is already brewing in this dry soil. Let us know in the comments if you are cheering for Clara. I have a heavy iron plow and a massive draft horse at my workshop on the ridge, Elias stated, his tone shifting from observational to entirely businesslike. I can break this field for you in 3 days. But I don't work for free and I know you don't have the city coin to hire me. Clara crossed her arms over her chest, ignoring the stinging pain in her raw palms. What are your terms? I am a glassblower, Elias rumbled, pointing a thick, scarred finger toward the smoke rising from the distant wooded ridge. I shape crystal for the apothecaries in the city. But I have the palate of a blacksmith. I cannot mix the chemical dyes to color the glass, and my financial ledgers are a complete chaotic disaster. You organize my books, mix the precise metallic oxides for my furnace, and cook a hot meal at the end of the day. In exchange, I provide the heavy labor to break this field. And when your flowers finally bloom, I will blow the custom crystal bottles for your perfumes. Clara looked at the massive quiet giant. He was offering her a vital lifeline, cleverly disguised as a mutual trade so she would not have to swallow her fierce pride. It was an act of profound, silent respect. I accept your terms, Mr. Reed, Clara said, a genuine, powerful warmth finally touching her voice. And you should know my mathematical ledgers are entirely flawless. A faint, incredibly handsome smirk touched the corner of Elias's mouth, instantly softening his intimidating features and revealing the deeply artistic soul beneath the rough exterior. He nodded once, turned his broad back and walked toward the ridge to fetch his horse. Clara watched him go, feeling a radical, unstoppable surge of hope. Her greedy sister had stolen the past, but Clara was about to build an unstoppable future. The arrangement between Clara and Elias rapidly evolved from a practical trade into a seamless, profoundly deep partnership. True to his word, Elias arrived the very next morning before the sun even breached the horizon, leading a massive muscular draft horse hitched to a heavy rusted iron plow. For 3 grueling, blistering days, the quiet giant battled the sun-baked earth. His broad shoulders strained against the heavy leather harness as the plow violently tore through the stubborn rocks and hard dirt, breaking the impenetrable crust of the valley. Clara did not sit idly by in the shade. She followed directly behind him, her hands protected by a pair of heavy leather gloves he had brought her, painstakingly planting the thousands of dormant lavender seeds she had smuggled out of London, pressing them firmly into the freshly turned rocky soil. In the evenings, Clara climbed the steep, winding dirt path up the ridge to Elias's glass workshop. It was a fascinating, terrifyingly hot environment, dominated by a massive, roaring brick furnace that glowed with a fierce, blinding orange light. The air smelled of sharp wood smoke, melting sand and intense, dry heat. Here the intimidating, quiet woodsman transformed into a mesmerizing master artist. Clara sat at a small, cluttered wooden desk in the corner, balancing his chaotic receipts and ledgers with meticulous precision, occasionally glancing up from her inkwell to watch him work. Elias would stand before the open furnace, his canvas shirt completely soaked in sweat, his muscular arms steady as he rotated a long, hollow iron pipe. He moved with a breathtaking, fluid grace, blowing air into the pipe to expand the glowing, molten glass, shaping it with wet wooden blocks and thick newspaper. He possessed a raw, intimidating masculine power, yet his heavy, scarred hands were capable of producing the most delicate, fragile and beautiful objects Clara had ever seen. The stark contrast between the man's rugged, formidable exterior and his profound, delicate artistic soul captivated her entirely. One late evening, as the brutal heat of the southern sun finally gave way to a cool, quiet, starry night, Elias pulled a finished piece from the cooling kiln. He walked slowly over to the small desk where Clara was organizing his final ledger entries. He did not speak. He simply placed a small, perfectly shaped crystal perfume bottle directly onto the open book. It was an absolute masterpiece, heavy and solid at the base with an elegant, slender neck, and the thick glass was tinted a breathtaking, subtle shade of deep amethyst purple. Clara gasped softly, her fingers gently touching the cool, smooth surface of the brilliant crystal. Elias, this is magnificent. I have seen the absolute finest bottles imported from Paris for my father's apothecary, and they do not even begin to compare to the clarity and weight of this glass. Elias pulled up a heavy wooden stool, sitting across from her, his striking pale blue eyes locking onto hers with a quiet, devastating intensity. "I mixed the cobalt and manganese oxides exactly as you wrote in the formula," he rumbled, his deep voice carrying a rare, vulnerable softness. "I designed the shape specifically for your hands, Clara. When your lavender finally blooms, this is the vessel that will hold it. You are not going to put your masterpiece into cheap, ordinary glass." If your heart is melting at how deeply Elias respects and values Clara's talent, please type "true partner" in the comments. This is what a real, supportive man looks like. Don't forget to subscribe to see their empire grow. Clara's breath hitched in her throat. For 15 long years she had been a silent, completely invisible servant in her own family's home, expected to produce brilliance without ever receiving a fraction of the credit, the respect, or the glory. Now, sitting in a hot, dusty workshop on a forgotten mountain ridge, a rugged, scarred giant was looking at her as if she were the undisputed queen of the world. He didn't just see her, he actively elevated her art. She reached across the wooden desk, her hand trembling slightly, and placed her fingers softly over his large, calloused hand. Elias immediately turned his palm up, gently intertwining his thick fingers tightly with hers, his thumb lightly brushing the healing blisters on her pale skin. It was a silent, profound promise between two brilliant, discarded souls. 2 weeks later, the punishing heat finally broke. A massive, heavy coastal storm rolled over the southern valleys, soaking the dry, rocky field of Stone Creek for 3 straight days. When the blazing sun finally returned, Clara walked out onto the front porch of the ruined cottage, a cup of hot tea in her hands. She looked out over the massive, plowed field, her heart suddenly hammering violently against her ribs. Pushing triumphantly through the dark, wet, rocky soil were thousands upon thousands of tiny, vibrant green shoots. The barren wasteland had officially awakened. The resilient roots had taken hold in the stones. Clara Montgomery's multi-million-dollar empire had officially begun to rise from the dirt. The transformation of the desolate, sun-scorched wasteland of Stone Creek into a breathtaking multi-million-dollar empire was not a delicate, quiet miracle. It was an aggressive, explosive conquest of the earth. 6 months after the brutal, back-breaking labor of breaking the hard crust of the southern valleys, the brutal summer sun returned with a vengeance. But this time it did not bake a dead, dusty field. The intense heat, the harsh, alkaline rocks, and the punishing dryness of the soil did exactly what Clara Montgomery had predicted they would do. The Levangula angustifolia did not simply survive the brutal conditions. It actively thrived in them. Forced deep into the rocky earth to find water, the roots produced an essential oil of a concentration, purity, and complexity that was completely unrivaled in the entire European continent. When the massive, sprawling field finally reached full bloom in late July, it was a sight of such staggering, overwhelming beauty that traveling merchants completely stopped their wagons on the high ridge just to stare. The barren, gray graveyard of Stone Creek had vanished entirely. In its place was a vast, unbroken, vibrant ocean of deep, brilliant purple. The color was so intense it almost hurt the eyes, contrasting sharply against the bright blue of the southern sky. The air, once heavy with dry dust, was now completely saturated with a scent so profoundly rich, sweet, and complex that it felt intoxicating to simply breathe. Clara stood on the newly repaired, sturdy wooden porch of her cottage, holding a small wicker basket. She was 49 years old, and the brutal physical labor had not aged her. It had refined her. She wore a simple, light linen dress, a wide-brimmed straw hat protecting her face from the sun, her dark hair woven into a thick, elegant braid. The pale, exhausted, and invisible servant who had been cast out of London was completely gone. She radiated a quiet, terrifying power, the absolute confidence of a woman who had bent the earth to her will. Elias arrived at dawn, walking down the steep, winding path from his glass workshop, leading 2 massive, muscular draft horses hitched to a wide, flatbed wooden wagon. The quiet giant stopped at the edge of the purple field, his striking pale blue eyes wide with genuine, profound awe. He had seen the green shoots fighting through the dirt for months, but the sheer, violent explosion of color and fragrance that had occurred overnight was something he had never witnessed in his 54 years on the mountain. He walked slowly toward the porch, the deep, rich scent of the lavender completely masking the sharp smell of his furnace smoke. It looks like the earth split open and bled pure amethyst, Clara. Elias rumbled, his deep voice thick with emotion, his gaze locked onto the endless rows of brilliant purple flowers. I have never seen anything like this in my life. You actually did it. Clara smiled, a brilliant, warm expression that illuminated her entire face. She stepped off the porch, walking directly into the dense, fragrant bushes, running her hands lightly over the soft, purple blooms. We did it, Elias. If you hadn't broken the crust with that heavy plow, these seeds would have baked on the surface. Now we just have to harvest it before the essential oils evaporate in the afternoon heat. For 3 exhausting, exhilarating weeks, Clara and Elias worked side by side in a seamless, unbroken rhythm. They hired a dozen local villagers, paying them incredibly generous, fair wages that shocked the impoverished southern community. They worked in the cool hours of the early morning, cutting the heavy, fragrant lavender stalks with sharp, curved sickles, loading them by the thousands into Elias's massive wooden wagons. Clara had transformed the ruined barn behind her cottage into a massive, sophisticated distillery. Using intricate, heavy copper stills she had designed herself and commissioned a local blacksmith to build, she began the slow, meticulous process of extracting the pure liquid gold from the flowers. The resulting essential oil was a masterpiece. It was a thick, potent, crystal-clear liquid that carried a fragrance so perfectly balanced, sweet, herbaceous, and incredibly deep, that it made the expensive, diluted perfumes of the city smell like cheap synthetic water. When Clara carefully poured the very first batch into the stunning, heavy amethyst purple crystal bottles that Elias had blown specifically for her, holding the exquisite vessel up to the sunlight, she knew with absolute terrifying certainty that she held an empire in her hands. If you are completely breathless watching Clara's barren field explode into a multi-million-dollar purple ocean, hit the like button right now. Type Queen of the South in the comments to celebrate her incredible victory. Don't forget to subscribe. She did not travel back to London to beg the merchants to buy her creation. She simply sent 3 small, carefully packaged crystal bottles to the most exclusive, famously critical fragrance houses in Paris, along with a handwritten note declaring the origin of the oil. She knew exactly what she possessed. The trap was set, the masterpiece was finished, and the absolute destruction of her sister's stolen empire was only a matter of time. While the southern valleys were exploding with vibrant color and unimaginable wealth, a very different, deeply toxic atmosphere was suffocating the grand, mahogany-paneled walls of the Montgomery apothecary in London. Isabella Montgomery had stolen her family's legendary empire with the arrogant, entirely misguided belief that a prestigious brand name and a massive vaulted safe were the only things required to maintain a fortune. She had spent the first 3 months of her hostile takeover doing exactly what she did best, spending exorbitant amounts of money. She completely remodeled the historic storefront, replacing the dark, rich oak and the antique glass bottles with cheap, gaudy gold leaf and massive, tasteless crystal chandeliers. She wore a new, custom-tailored silk gown every single day, aggressively parading her stolen wealth in front of the city's elite. But Isabella knew absolutely nothing about the delicate, complex alchemy of essential oils, and her arrogant husband, Edward, only understood the brutal mathematics of shipping cargo. Without Clara's meticulous, invisible hand guiding the complex extractions, balancing the fragile top notes with the heavy base resins, the famous Montgomery perfumes quickly devolved into an absolute disaster. Isabella had foolishly attempted to follow their father's cryptic, heavily guarded journals, completely failing to understand that the formulas were written in a complex, personal shorthand that only Clara could decipher. The resulting products were catastrophic. The delicate, expensive floral waters turned cloudy and rancid within weeks. The signature heavy perfumes, once renowned across Europe for their incredible longevity and elegance, now smelled sharp, synthetic and aggressively cheap. The high society clientele, a famously fickle and unforgiving group, noticed the drastic, humiliating drop in quality almost immediately. The financial collapse was not a slow, gentle decline. It was a violent, highly public freefall. The wealthy aristocratic families who had purchased Montgomery fragrances for generations abruptly cancelled their massive standing orders. They sent polite, devastatingly cruel letters to Isabella, stating that they could no longer in good conscience wear a perfume that smelled like a common laundress's soap. The daily line of wealthy patrons outside the gaudy new storefront vanished entirely, replaced by aggressive, impatient debt collectors demanding payment for the massive loans Edward had taken out to fund Isabella's lavish renovations. Isabella was currently sitting behind her father's massive polished desk, her expensive pristine silk dress completely failing to hide the desperate, terrified panic contorting her heavily powdered face. The grand apothecary was dead silent, a terrifying contrast to the bustling, profitable hum it had maintained under Clara's quiet leadership. Edward paced frantically back and forth across the expensive Persian rug, his face flushed with hot, ugly anger, holding a stack of past-due financial ledgers in his trembling hands. "The bank has officially frozen the primary accounts, Isabella," Edward snapped, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, throwing the heavy leather books onto the desk. "The shipping contracts I secured using this business as collateral are completely void. We are bleeding money from a dozen different wounds. If we do not produce a massive, highly profitable new fragrance for the winter season, we are going to lose the townhouse, the store, and every single thing your father built." Isabella rubbed her throbbing temples, the heavy, suffocating weight of her own profound incompetence finally crushing her arrogant ego. "I have hired 3 different master chemists from the university, Edward. They cannot decipher the journals. They say the formulas are missing a vital binding agent that Clara kept entirely in her head." A sharp, impatient knock on the heavy oak door interrupted her miserable spiraling. Her nervous, deeply intimidated manager stepped into the room, holding a silver tray with a single thick, beautifully embossed envelope. The manager looked terrified, shifting his weight from foot to foot as if preparing to deliver a death sentence. "Madam," the manager stammered, placing the tray on the edge of the desk. "This just arrived from the High Society Gazette. It is the premier fragrance review for the upcoming winter season." Isabella snatched the heavy paper, tearing it open with trembling, desperate fingers. She scanned the elegant script, searching frantically for any mention of the Montgomery brand. Her eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated horror as she read the headline of the main article. It did not mention her failing store. The entire page was dedicated to a breathtaking, unprecedented new discovery that was completely dominating the European elite. The Amethyst Miracle of the South. A new empress of fragrance emerges. The article detailed in agonizing poetic prose a revolutionary new lavender essential oil that possessed a depth and clarity never before seen in modern perfumery. The elite fragrance houses of Paris were practically going to war over the exclusive distribution rights. The oil was housed in stunning custom-blown amethyst crystal bottles, and the creator was described as a mysterious, brilliant woman operating a massive, highly successful private estate in the Southern Valleys, an estate known simply as Stone Creek. Isabella stopped breathing. The name hit her like a physical blow to the chest. Stone Creek. The barren, rocky, worthless piece of dirt she had intentionally thrown her sister into, expecting her to freeze and starve. It was impossible. It had to be a cruel, terrifying coincidence. "Prepare the carriage, Edward," Isabella demanded, standing up abruptly, her voice shrill with manic, desperate entitlement. "We are traveling to the Southern Valleys immediately. That land belongs to the Montgomery family. Clara has stolen our fortune." She was marching blindly toward her own absolute destruction, completely unaware that the sister she had banished to a graveyard was already wearing the crown she so desperately needed to survive. The journey from the damp, grey streets of London to the blistering, sun-scorched expanse of the Southern Valleys was an agonizing, profoundly humiliating ordeal for Isabella and Edward Montgomery. Accustomed to the luxurious, velvet-lined private carriages of the city elite, they were forced to travel in a rented, violently rattling stagecoach that offered absolutely no protection from the harsh elements. For 3 miserable days, the dry, heavy southern dust coated Isabella's expensive, custom-tailored silk gowns, turning the dark, elegant fabric into a stiff, suffocating shade of dirty brown. Edward sweated profusely in his heavy wool suit, his arrogant face flushed with a toxic mixture of physical misery and desperate, manic greed. They spent the entire journey convincing themselves that Clara had simply gotten lucky, and that with a few aggressive legal threats, they could easily terrorize her into surrendering her newfound wealth back to the Montgomery name. However, when the exhausted horses finally crested the high rocky ridge overlooking Stone Creek, the arrogant demands completely died in their dry throats. The sight before them was not a barren, struggling farm, nor was it the ruined, crumbling stone cottage they had banished Clara to. It was a staggering multi-million-dollar empire of unparalleled breathtaking beauty. The vast endless fields of vibrant deep purple Levangula angustifolia stretched out as far as the eye could see, rolling across the valley like an ocean of amethyst under the brilliant blue sky. The air was completely saturated with the incredibly rich, intoxicating and expensive scent of pure essential oils. The ruined cottage had been masterfully rebuilt and expanded into a sprawling, elegant stone manor, surrounded by massive newly constructed wooden barns. Through the wide open doors of the largest barn, Isabella could see massive gleaming copper distillation stills operating with a mesmerizing, efficient rhythm, operated by dozens of well-paid, loyal local workers. Edward pulled the carriage to a harsh halt at the edge of the property, the wheels kicking up a cloud of white dust. Isabella stepped out, her expensive leather boots sinking into the dry earth. She felt a sudden, terrifying wave of intimidation, completely overwhelmed by the sheer, undeniable scale of her sister's monumental success. She marched up the wide, swept stone path toward the sweeping veranda of the manor, determined to project a false aura of absolute authority. Clara was standing on the wide wooden steps, holding a leather-bound ledger. She was not the pale, exhausted, invisible servant Isabella remembered. She was radiant, wearing a beautifully tailored dress of light linen, her dark hair woven elegantly, her skin glowing with health and the profound, unshakable confidence of a woman who commanded her own magnificent destiny. She looked like an absolute queen standing before her fortress. "Clara," Isabella demanded, her voice shrill and trembling slightly, completely lacking its usual aristocratic venom. "What is the meaning of this? You have stolen the Montgomery family's intellectual property. You ran away to this wasteland and built a massive operation using our father's secret formulas. We are here to take formal control of this estate and the distribution rights to the oil." Clara did not flinch. She did not raise her voice, nor did she look angry. She slowly closed her ledger, looking down at her sister's dusty, ruined silk dress, her desperate, panicked eyes, and Edward's pathetic, aggressive posturing. She looked at them with an expression of absolute, freezing indifference. "You are trespassing on private property, Isabella," Clara said, her voice perfectly calm, smooth, and chillingly polite, carrying clearly over the warm southern breeze. "And you are remarkably, pathetically mistaken about the law." Edward stepped forward aggressively, his fists clenched at his sides. "Don't play games with us, Clara. Your name is Montgomery. Everything you produce belongs to the family brand in London. We will bring a magistrate down here and seize those copper stills by nightfall if you do not sign the transfer papers." "You will do absolutely no such thing," Clara replied softly, stepping closer to the edge of the stairs, leaning forward so only they could hear her freezing tone. "When you manipulated our dying father into signing that codicil, you were so incredibly greedy, so eager to discard me, that you insisted the deed to Stone Creek be transferred to me completely free and clear of the family estate. You legally severed me from the Montgomery brand. You handed my solicitor an ironclad document. You have absolutely no legal claim to my land, my lavender, or my magnificent business. If you are literally cheering right now as Clara completely destroys her greedy sister with the very papers she used to banish her, smash the like button. Type checkmate in the comments to claim her ultimate victory." Isabella stared at her, sheer, unadulterated panic gripping her throat. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had nothing. Her arrogance had handed Clara the ultimate, unbreakable shield. "Clara, please," Isabella stammered, her cruel facade shattering into pathetic begging. "The store in London is failing. The bank has frozen our accounts. We are completely ruined. I am your sister. You cannot turn me away to starve." Before Clara could deliver her final, devastating blow, the heavy wooden door behind her opened. Elias Reed stepped out onto the veranda. The towering, muscular glassblower did not yell or draw a weapon. He simply stood directly behind Clara, his massive, broad-shouldered frame casting a long, intimidating shadow over the two miserable city aristocrats. His striking, pale blue eyes locked onto Edward with a quiet, lethal warning, radiating a fierce, protective fury. "The lady asked you to leave," Elias rumbled, his deep, resonant voice vibrating with the unyielding authority of a mountain storm. "If you take one more step toward her, I will personally throw you off this ridge." Isabella and Edward looked at the giant, scarred man, and then at Clara, who stood tall, unyielding and completely victorious. They were utterly destroyed. Without saying another word, they turned around, their shoulders slumped in total defeat, and began the humiliating walk back to their dusty carriage, leaving the Purple Empire behind forever. The heavy, suffocating cloud of white dust kicked up by the retreating carriage slowly settled back onto the dry southern earth, leaving the sprawling estate of Stone Creek in a sudden, profound and beautiful silence. The aggressive, toxic energy that Isabella and Edward had dragged into the valley evaporated into the warm afternoon air, replaced once again by the rich, intoxicating and peaceful scent of the blooming lavender fields. The adrenaline that had surged fiercely through Clara's veins during the confrontation began to quietly recede, leaving behind a deep, overwhelming sense of finality. She stood on the edge of the sweeping wooden veranda, staring at the empty, winding dirt road. The ghosts of her painful, invisible past in London had finally been completely banished. They had come seeking to conquer her again, and she had watched them break against the fortress she had built with her own two hands. Elias did not immediately leave her side when the carriage disappeared. He moved with the quiet, deliberate and incredibly grounded presence of a man who understood the heavy weight of surviving a storm. He stepped up beside her at the wooden railing, his massive broad shoulders offering a silent, unbreakable wall of protection against the world. He did not ask if she was all right, nor did he offer empty, patronizing platitudes. He simply reached out and gently rested his large, calloused hand over hers on the railing, his thumb lightly tracing her knuckles. "You handled them with the magnificent, terrifying grace of a true queen, Clara," Elias rumbled, his deep, rich voice carrying clearly over the sound of the gentle wind rustling through the endless purple flowers. "They are cowards, completely blinded by their own pathetic greed. You never have to look at their faces ever again. This valley belongs to you and no one will ever take it." Clara leaned her head against his strong, muscular arm, finally allowing the heavy, invisible armor she had worn for 15 years to completely crack and fall away. She looked at Elias, seeing the unwavering, protective devotion shining clearly in his striking, pale blue eyes, and she realized that she no longer wanted to carry her heavy burdens alone. She had spent her entire life serving a family that did not value her, but here, standing next to a rugged glassblower who had literally helped her break the earth, she felt an absolute, profound sense of belonging. "They threw me away, Elias," Clara whispered, her voice trembling slightly with the raw emotion of the moment, breaking the silence of the veranda. "They intentionally sent me to a place they believed was a barren, rocky graveyard. I was so terrified when I first stepped off that mail coach. I thought I was going to starve in the dirt. I thought the entire world had forgotten me." Elias turned completely to face her, giving her his absolute, undivided attention. He reached out, his large, warm hands gently cupping her face, carefully lifting her chin so she was forced to look directly into his eyes. His expression was not filled with pity. It was filled with a fierce, profound admiration and an overwhelming, tender love. "Listen to me, Clara," Elias murmured, his voice thick with deep emotion. "Those fools did not banish you to a graveyard. They unknowingly released a masterpiece from a dark cage. You took a piece of dead, scorched earth and turned it into the most magnificent, breathtaking empire I have ever witnessed. You are the strongest, most extraordinary woman I have ever known. And I promise you, as long as there is breath in my lungs, you will never be forgotten or invisible ever again." If your heart is completely melting over Elias and his deep, respectful devotion to Clara, please type "true partner" in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the beautiful conclusion to their story. Clara let out a soft, breathless sob, tears of absolute, radiant joy finally spilling over her eyelashes. Elias wiped them away with incredible gentleness. He then took a slow, deep breath, stepping back just slightly to reach into the pocket of his heavy canvas-work trousers. He did not drop to one knee like a wealthy city aristocrat performing a theatrical play. He simply stood before her as a grown, honest man offering his entire life. He pulled out a small, exquisite object and placed it delicately into the palm of her hand. It was a stunning hand-forged silver ring. But instead of a traditional cold diamond, set perfectly into the center of the silver band was a brilliant, deeply faceted piece of custom-blown amethyst crystal, the exact same breathtaking shade of purple as the exquisite perfume bottles he crafted for her empire. "I don't just want to blow the glass for your fragrant oils, Clara," Elias whispered, his pale blue eyes shimmering with absolute devotion. "I want to be your partner in the fields, in the distillery, and in every single day of the life we have left. I want to build a family with you in this valley. Will you marry me?" Clara looked down at the beautiful, meaningful ring, and then up at the magnificent man who had seen her at her absolute lowest and treated her like undisputed royalty. She didn't hesitate for a single fraction of a second. "Yes," she breathed, throwing her arms around his thick neck, pulling him down to her. "Yes, Elias. With all my heart." He wrapped his massive arms around her waist, lifting her effortlessly into the warm southern air, capturing her lips in a deep, profoundly romantic kiss as the golden sun began to set over their vast purple empire. A wedding in the blazing, sun-drenched southern valleys was not an event dictated by the rigid, suffocating and deeply insincere rules of London's high society. It was not a vulgar display of stolen wealth, nor was it a cold, calculated transaction between two powerful families seeking to merge their bank accounts. It was a genuine, joyous, and profoundly moving celebration of two incredibly resilient people who had survived the harshest, driest seasons of their lives and chosen to build a thriving oasis together. When Clara and Elias announced their engagement, the entire community of Stone Creek, the local villagers who had helped them harvest the massive purple fields, erupted in genuine, unadulterated happiness. The distillery and the glass furnace on the upper ridge were shut down for 3 full days, an unprecedented event that only heightened the immense anticipation sweeping through the valley. Clara, at 48 years old, had never looked more breathtakingly beautiful. The pale, exhausted and invisible woman who had arrived on a jolting mail coach with nothing but a leather bag and a shattered heart was completely, permanently gone. On the late afternoon of her wedding, as the fierce summer heat began to mellow into a warm, golden glow, she wore a simple, elegant gown of heavy ivory silk, completely unadorned by the excessive, gaudy lace her sister preferred. Her dark hair was pinned up elegantly, woven with small sprigs of fresh, incredibly fragrant wild lavender. Around her neck hung a delicate silver chain holding a single flawless drop of deep purple amethyst crystal, a masterpiece Elias had blown specifically for her. The ceremony took place on the sprawling, manicured lawn of the newly expanded stone manor, situated directly at the edge of the vast, blooming lavender fields. The air was crisp, tasting of rich earth and the intoxicating sweetness of essential oils, the setting sun casting a long, warm, magnificent light over the 50 guests gathered in simple wooden chairs. When Clara walked down the grassy aisle, the local musicians playing a soft, rhythmic acoustic melody, Elias stood waiting under a rustic wooden archway draped in climbing green vines. The distinguished, towering Glassblower did not wear a stiff, uncomfortable city suit. He wore a crisp linen shirt and a dark, tailored vest that highlighted his broad, muscular frame. He did not look at her with the arrogant, entitled possession of a London aristocrat. He looked at her with an absolute, breath-stealing devotion, as if she were the only magnificent, brilliant light left in the entire world. When they exchanged their vows, their voices carried clearly over the sound of the gentle southern breeze rustling the endless purple bushes. They were not the naive, fragile promises of youth. They were the deep, profound, and unbreakable commitments of two mature souls who understood the true value of loyalty, relentless hard work, and a quiet, unbroken peace. As Elias leaned down to gently kiss his bride, a loud, joyous, and thunderous cheer erupted from the villagers, echoing across the rocky ridge. While the golden southern sun set on Clara's perfect, joyous new beginning, a very different, deeply terrifying reality was closing in on the dark, smog-choked, miserable streets of London. Isabella Montgomery was completely, devastatingly ruined. The magnificent flagship apothecary she had stolen from Clara was entirely gone. The bank had officially seized the historic property, padlocking the grand front doors and violently auctioning off the massive oak counters, the expensive imported herbs, and the gaudy crystal chandeliers to pay the massive, mounting debts she and Edward had carelessly incurred. Isabella was no longer a respected, feared member of the elite. She was a notorious, pathetic, and deeply humiliated pariah. The same aristocratic families who had eagerly consumed her lies and attended her lavish parties now crossed the street to actively avoid her, disgusted by her spectacular financial collapse. She was currently renting a tiny, damp room above a loud, foul-smelling tavern in the industrial district, the exact opposite of the luxurious mansion she had grown accustomed to. She sat on a lumpy, stained mattress, shivering in a worn, threadbare coat that smelled strongly of cheap gin and unwashed bodies. Edward had abandoned her weeks ago, fleeing the city to escape his furious creditors, leaving her entirely alone to face the catastrophic consequences of their shared greed. She held a crumpled, weeks-old copy of a prestigious fashion gazette in her trembling, dirty hands. The main page featured a massive, beautiful illustration of a stunning amethyst crystal perfume bottle. The Empress of Fragrance weds. The article celebrated the brilliant genius behind the highly successful Stone Creek empire, describing Clara's rural wedding to her master glassblower as the most romantic, triumphant event of the season. If you believe that karma always collects its massive debts in the end, hit the like button right now. Type justice in the comments to celebrate Clara's final, absolute victory over Isabella. Isabella stared at the elegant script, the sheer overwhelming weight of her colossal mistake finally crushing the last remaining fragments of her arrogant ego. She had held a magnificent, priceless diamond in her hands for 15 years, and she had thrown it into the dry dirt for a piece of cheap, worthless glass. Now Clara was building a massive, lucrative global empire and living a life of profound love and deep respect, while she was quite literally freezing in the miserable gutters of the city. The bitter, agonizing taste of absolute regret flooded her mouth. She crumpled the gazette and threw it onto the damp floor, burying her face in her dirty hands as the cruel, cold reality of her karma finally consumed her completely. 5 years later, the relentless passage of time had only served to deepen the massive roots of the Stone Creek Empire and the profound, unbreakable bond between Clara and Elias. The quiet, forgotten, and once desolate Southern Valley was no longer a hidden secret. It had completely transformed into a highly sought-after destination for the affluent, the artistic, and the royal houses of Europe, drawn entirely by the legendary reputation of the massive, glowing glass furnace on the ridge and the endless purple fields below. The original stone cottage and the adjoining barns had expanded once again, now occupying an entire vast compound overlooking the valley. The operation employed dozens of local residents, providing fair, generous wages and a level of deep respect that completely revitalized the impoverished southern economy. Clara was no longer the sole, exhausted laborer working in the dark hours before dawn, grinding herbs in a damp London basement. She had taken on a team of eager, talented young apprentices, meticulously teaching them the complex, magical alchemy of essential oils, ensuring that her father's sacred rescue journal would live on for generations. Yet despite her staggering, unimaginable wealth and the massive global success of the business, Clara absolutely refused to adopt the cold, disconnected arrogance of the London elite she had left behind. She still tied a heavy canvas apron around her waist every single morning. She still found profound, meditative peace in the rhythmic, careful extraction of the potent lavender oils, and she still walked through the massive fields, running her bare hands over the vibrant purple blooms that had saved her life. It was late afternoon on a crisp, brilliant autumn day. The blazing southern heat had finally softened, carrying the sharp scent of dry earth and the rich, intoxicating aroma of pure lavender from the distillery's massive copper chimneys. Clara stood on the expansive, polished wooden veranda of the manor, watching the wealthy patrons carefully load their expensive carriages with crates of her highly coveted amethyst perfume bottles. She wore a beautifully tailored dress of deep, warm plum wool, a delicate shawl draped elegantly over her shoulders to ward off the slight chill. She was 53 years old, and the silver streaks in her dark hair only added to her striking regal beauty. The heavy, glass-paneled oak door leading out to the veranda opened quietly. Elias stepped out, his tall, broad-shouldered frame commanding immediate respect from the nearby workers. At 59, the master glassblower was as ruggedly handsome and formidable as ever, his dark hair now entirely silver, his striking pale blue eyes still burning with the quiet, intense intellect and deep devotion that had first drawn Clara to him. He carried 2 steaming porcelain cups of dark, strong tea. Elias walked over to Clara, offering her a cup with a gentle, affectionate smile. He stood beside her at the heavy wooden railing, his massive arm naturally wrapping around her waist, pulling her comfortably against his side. Clara leaned her head against his broad, muscular shoulder, sipping the hot, fragrant tea, looking out at the endless, vibrant expanse of the Purple Valley. The new shipment of cobalt oxide arrived at the ridge this morning, Elias murmured, his deep, rich baritone voice vibrating comfortingly against her shoulder. The color of the new crystal batch is so intense, the apprentices in the workshop could barely look away from the furnace. They are thrilled. Clara smiled, her dark eyes reflecting the golden, magnificent light of the setting southern sun. They have been practicing the delicate curves for the new bottle design all week, Elias. They are incredibly eager to prove themselves to the master. Elias turned his head slightly, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her temple. They are learning from the absolute, undisputed queen of the valley, my love. It is no surprise they are desperate to impress you with their glass. Clara set her teacup down on the wide wooden railing. She turned fully to face her husband, her hands reaching up to rest gently against his strong chest. For 15 years she had lived a life of terrifying invisible servitude, constantly managing the fragile ego of a sick father and a cruel, manipulative sister. Now, standing in the golden light of her own magnificent creation, anchored perfectly by the deep, unwavering devotion of a man who truly saw her monumental worth, she felt an overwhelming, profound sense of gratitude. I planted the seeds, Elias, Clara whispered softly, her eyes locked onto his, shining with absolute clarity and deep, abiding love. But you broke the stone. You gave me the beautiful, strong vessels to finally share my masterpiece with the world. Elias smiled, his large, warm, scarred hands gently cupping her face, his thumbs lightly tracing her cheekbones. You were always meant to build an empire, Clara. I am merely incredibly honored to be allowed to shape the glass that holds it. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a slow, deep, profoundly romantic kiss that tasted of hot tea and the absolute, unshakable certainty of their shared magnificent life. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the southern sky in brilliant, fiery strokes of orange and violet. The Stone Creek Manor hummed with warmth and vibrant life, a towering golden monument to the incredible resilience of a woman who had been thrown into the dirt, only to emerge carrying her own magnificent, blooming empire.